Gentleman from Texas is recognized for questions.
I cannot agree to vote for a full increase in the debt without any assurance that steps will be taken to reduce the alarming increase in the deficits and the debt. Joe Biden, 1984, when the debt was $1.5 trillion. Here we sit. Here we sit. Heard a lot about the process. Make no mistake about it, as I think the Chairman Away has said and others, it'd be my strong preference for the provisions of this legislation that have not gone through committee to go through committee. That'd be my preference. What we have right now is a president of the United States that refuses to sit down and do anything serious about the debt ceiling at all. Gives vague notions of a, quote, clean debt ceiling, as if that's remotely responsible for the American people. We know full well it is not. It's a sham. So it is Republicans who are having to do the work that Democrats refuse to do. Period. Full stop. And when we are doing that, yes, there are some bills that have not yet gone through committee, despite that having been my preference. But let's remember what the legislation is in front of us. The text of the bill has been available since last Wednesday, certainly publicly available since Friday, more than 72 hours per our rules. Of the 20 debt ceiling increases since 2000, only 2 have been reported out of committee. Not saying that's a good or bad thing. I'm just saying those are the facts. H.R. 1 went through full regular order and, in fact, passed off the House floor. The REINS Act, which did not go through committee, and I would have preferred that it would have, passed this body with bipartisan support in 2017 in its current form. The spending repeals are effectively cuts, just straight up clean cuts. For the IRA, which, by the way, when we passed the IRA, there were 158 proxy votes jammed through in August when we were forced to fly back because the speaker didn't give a damn about regular order or process. I had to leave for my vacation, come back and leave my family, whom I barely see, get on a flight and come here because I wasn't going to proxy vote. So I came up here, did my job, and voted against it. But there were 158 who did God knows what and didn't show up here to do their job. We passed the IRS repeal in January. It went through this floor. And we're repealing something that was in that IRA, which was passed with that awful process last August. The COVID funds are a simple, clean repeal, which we've talked about and I'll come back to in a minute. The caps are simple. These are things we've done repeatedly. The work requirements are based on the 1996 welfare reforms that President Biden supported under President Clinton. He said then, the culture of welfare must be replaced with the culture of work. The culture of dependence must be replaced with the culture of self-sufficiency and personal responsibility. And the culture of permanence must no longer be a way of life. The fiscal year 23 omnibus was a $1.7 trillion bill that was 4,100 pages long, released in the dead of night at 1:30 in the morning before the Senate voted and 226 members voted by proxy. It is under litigation now because of its dubious constitutionality. So I don't want to hear people crying me a river about process, because what we're talking about is undoing the damage of an irresponsible Democratic House of Representatives that jammed through legislation without a whit's concern for those of us who are trying to have a say in what it was. This legislation is available. There is hardly anything new in it. And if you don't like the cuts, vote against the cuts. And that's fine. But what we're trying to do is return this to the American people. Our options in front of us are pretty simple. You can tax. Lord knows my colleagues on the other side of the aisle would love to tax more. Borrow, print money, while pretending that you're saying that it's borrowing, or we deal with discretionary spending or mandatory spending. Those are our options. My colleagues on the other side of the aisle would like to tax more. Well, guess what? Right now, we're at 19.6% of GDP in tax revenue. Only 3 times in history has it been that high. Right now, 2000, at the end of the dot-com boom, after Republican control helped create an environment where we were constraining spending and create economic growth, and President Clinton worked with us to do it, and World War II. 3 times where revenue has been where it is today. Yet my colleagues on the other side of the aisle say we have a revenue problem. Bull. They think we have a revenue problem because they think government creates jobs. It doesn't. People create jobs. Small businesses create jobs. Big businesses create jobs. Government does not create jobs. And at 19.6% revenue, I don't know why we would be saying we need more taxes for more revenue, other than the irresponsibility of a government out of control spending money we don't have. That's the actual fact. If we do nothing, we're on track to have a $1.58 trillion deficit this year. Is that correct, Mr. Arrington?
That's correct.
Interest on the debt. In 2024, we're going to be at $739 billion of debt, interest on the debt. Is that correct?
That's correct.
When are we projected to spend more on interest on the debt than on our own national defense? The primary obligation under the Constitution of the United States. When is that going to happen? Do you know?
The projections that I've got is 2025.
And whether we get there 2025 or 6 or 7, depending on interest rates in the economy, the point is we're staring down the barrel of more on interest on our debt than defending the United States of America. Is that correct?
That's how I see it.
Now, your counterpart on the Budget Committee, respectfully, was talking earlier, said, quote, we've got in the Biden budget $3 trillion in savings. But what does that leave out of the story in terms of how much that spends over the next decade? Where would that leave us in terms of debt, Chairman Arrington?
Well, let's start with it's half of the $6 trillion that Biden and our Democrat colleagues put onto the debt. So you have $17 trillion remaining, and in next year's proposal, the president's asking for $100 billion on discretionary and trillions of dollars in mandatory over the 10-year window. It is the largest sustained spending, taxing, and borrowing of any 10-year budget in the history.
In the history of the United States, correct? It would spend an additional $17 trillion, would be $50 trillion in debt, right? Another question here. There's been a lot of conversation in here, one in particular conversation exchange about the supposed impact on veterans, okay? We're trying to create a big political issue on the impact on veterans with respect to COVID, unobligated COVID dollars. I want everybody to understand this. Unobligated COVID dollars. After the president has said the COVID emergency is over, after we voted to say that we should end the COVID emergency, after so many issues have been exposed about our COVID spending, that supposedly because we have $50 billion of unobligated COVID dollars we would like to get back out of the hundreds of billions of dollars that I assume the chairman would agree with me have been obligated and are unspent in states and in agencies across the country. Would he agree?
I agree.
And would it surprise the chairman that according to USA spending on the VA, that as of February 2023, for the current fiscal year, the agency's been granted authority to spend $5 billion out of this federal account, i.e. the COVID account. They carried over a balance of $5 billion from last year. To date, 9.1% of the total $5 billion has been obligated. 9.1% had been obligated. They're not spending it for COVID at the VA. Yet my colleagues on the other side of the aisle want the American people to think we're somehow, because we want to take COVID money back, undermining veterans. Does the chairman think that that's a fair characterization?
I believe that is exactly the characterization.